It's been a bumper year for crops, but there is a massive backlog on rail cars that's made it nearly impossible for grain farmers to get their goods to market. They're calling it the biggest backlog ever. But rail companies say they've been shipping more than past years, and a record crop along with bouts of extreme weather have led to a huge log jam, train jam. So who's to blame, and what steps should be taken now to limit the damage? Was it caused because of the dismantling of the Canadian Wheat Board? Did that contribute to the grain crisis? Is it the train companies that are holding farmers hostage? Who's at fault here? What should the government do? In the foyer of the House of Commons, Pierre Lemieux, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture, is here. Malcolm Allen is the NDP's Agriculture Critic, and Ralph Goodale is the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party and an MP from Saskatchewan. I'm going to go opposition to government. Well, let's start with you, Mr. Goodale. What do you think is the cause of this crisis, and what do you think the government ought to do about it?
Well, there have been a number of contributing factors: a large crop, a cold winter, but it gets cold every winter, and we have had on occasion a larger crop than the one we've seen this year. I think it was those in charge of the grain handling and transportation system simply watching this wreck happening and not being prepared to do anything about it. And that includes the railways, and it certainly includes the government. The government was warned about this pending problem a year ago now when they were putting their rail service legislation before Parliament for approval. That legislation has proven to be a complete farce. It has not solved the problem, and the government was warned about this as much as a year ago. The problem here is the government unwilling or unable to take decisive action, even though they've got the power under Section 47 of the Canada Transportation Act, and they could amend the rail service legislation to fix the defects that they themselves designed and embedded in that legislation last year.
Okay, Malcolm Allen, your view, cause and what the government ought to do.
Well, clearly the cause is there is a lot of grain this year. It is cold, but as Chuck Strahl had said when he was Minister of Agriculture a number of years ago, when the railroaders used that same excuse, he said, well, it always gets cold in this country. You need to deal with it. In the railroaders' case, they've taken capacity out of their own ability to move. CP last year actually took 4,200 employees out. 400 locomotives were idled, and thousands of cars were idled as well. So they actually wound down their capacity to be able to move product. In the case of the logistics of actually moving grain from the prairies to the Port of Vancouver specifically, we've got 50-odd ships that are anchored off the Port of Vancouver all over the place. They're partially full, some are half full, because there's no logistics anymore. I mean, the Wheat Board actually used to provide the logistics of making sure that the grain that was headed went to that specific ship, filled the ship, moved the next one, bring it in.
But to be fair, sir, when you say there's 50 ships, that are, the shipping business doesn't work like that. There's always penalties, what they call demurrage fees, if they're a half-filled ship, and if there are delays. Are you saying that the shipping companies are eating these penalties because of that, or they just leave?
No, they're absolutely not eating them. They're passing them along.
To farmers.
That's where they'll end up. I mean, at the moment they go to the grain company, the grain company will eventually push that back to the farmer. And so we're literally looking at anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000 a day, depending on the demurrage charge in the particular shipping company, and whether it's partially loaded or unloaded, or whether you're shuttling it in and out. It's $10,000 a day to move a ship. So when you actually move it into port and load partially, move it back into anchor, then move it back into port, every time you do that, there's a $10,000 charge, and then there's a demurrage charge because you're sitting there.
Right.
And so you're simply adding up millions and millions of dollars that are literally going to get passed through the system, end up on the backs of farmers who actually haven't even sold crops yet. They haven't been paid for their crops. And so they actually are going into debt as we speak without being able to sell their crop in the first place.
All right, let me get to Pierre Lemieux's response. Sure. What do you think is the cause here? And what will the government do? Will there be intervention on the railways? What's going to happen here?
Right. So first let me say our number one priority is the economy, and there's no doubt that the agricultural sector is a key component of our economy, and the grain sector very much so as well. Ralph had mentioned there are some complicating factors this year, and there are. The cold weather means shorter trains. It means fewer cars because of the use of air brakes and the need, of course, to ensure rail safety. So that has complicated things. The winter was also started earlier. There's also the record crop. Normally a crop might be in the neighborhood of 50 million tons. This year it's in the 70 to 75 million tons, which is a 50% increase. Now, when you look at the railways in the way they performed last year compared to this year, they're about 7% lower than what they were last year. These are rough numbers, and that could be, of course, explained by the weather. But the point is that our farmers deserve a robust crop logistics system. There are many players in the crop logistics system, but rail is definitely...
Would the wheat board have managed this better? Is this a consequence? You got rid of the wheat board, whose job it was to manage these things.
Here's a fundamental question, Evan. Why did farmers sow 2 million more acres in wheat this year? Because they no longer have to deal with the monopoly of the wheat board. The wheat board is still there in a voluntary aspect. If farmers want to use the wheat board, go ahead. But what we've seen is a resurgence in wheat being sown in Western provinces.
But was it the smart? Okay, but hang on.
And the wheat board, let me just finish. The wheat board was not a success. You talk to Western farmers, the wheat board was a catastrophe. The mandatory wheat board was a catastrophe, and they're happy it's gone.
But has it led to this situation? The Premier of Saskatchewan, Brad Wall, I spoke to him on the House, and he was on this program speaking to Rosemary about this. Let me tell you what his view on this is. Check this out.
This is a duopoly. So, people say, well, are you advocating the federal government interfere with private companies to deal with this? Well, it's a duopoly. There's not a lot of competition out there, and Canada's brand is suffering. Japan has said, we're not going to buy wheat from Canada anymore because you're not a reliable supplier. We're going to buy it from the United States.
They've got emergency legislation to support this. What can the government do, Mr.
Right.
Lemieux?
So just to back up, I didn't hear him say anything at all backing up the wheat board and how they used to handle grain management or grain sales in Canada. They were a great frustration. Your question about what is the government going to do, the minister was clear today. All options are on the table. We are looking at all options. He needs to meet and has been meeting weekly with stakeholders.
Okay, what options? Just tell our viewers, they might be interested. What options? Will the government intervene on railroads? What are those options?
Right. I'm not going to get into what the options are because once a decision is made, those options will be delineated. But what I'm saying, though, Evan, is that the stakeholders in this issue must be consulted, and they must be consulted closely. And the railways are very much at the focus of this, but there are other stakeholders as well because it's a crop logistics system, not just a railway system. Farmers got to get product off their fields to market, and there are many players in there. And like the minister said today, all options are on the table. Nothing is off the table. And a solution will be proposed.
But listen, we've heard from the railway spokes. CP says grain's their largest commodity. They say it's not just railways. It also has to do with grain handling and transportation, grain elevators working 24/7. I mean, everybody's talking about everyone else. Again, let me put this to Malcolm Allen and Ralph Goodall. I got a minute here. Is this a case for the wheat board? They need some kind of central management? Or is it, as Mr. Lemieux said, hey, without the wheat board, there's more efficiency and there's a bumper crop? What is it?
Well, clearly there's no more, there's not the efficiency when it comes to logistics of moving grain. That's been proven. With ships half loaded instead of being fully loaded, and cars not moving, being spotted to the wrong spots. Even the grain companies will tell you they don't get what they're actually asking for. This is about action. This government needs to take action. The minister has said to me when I questioned him at QP, all things are on the table, we're still talking. Well, while he's talking, farmers are literally getting no money, and we're headed into the next crop year, and their only suggestion is take out another loan. And that is the absolutely worst economic advice you could actually give to anyone in the world, is say just get another loan to pay last year's loan off. They need to act, they need to regulate. That's what Premier Wall has been saying. That's what a number of experts from a number of different areas that don't belong to the old Canadian Wheat Board are saying this was a disaster that was waiting to happen. They just didn't recognize it, and if they did, they stuck their head in the sand.
Ralph Goodell, your last 30 seconds.
This has gone on for 5 months. It's not something that caught the government by surprise in the last few days. They have fumbled this problem for 5 long months.
Well, what do they do,
Mr.
Goodell?
It's now a $5 billion catastrophe. As I said at the beginning, there are 2 things that they need to do. They need to exercise the emergency authority of the Minister of Transport under Section 47 of the Canada Transportation Act in order to bring the coordination into the system that has been totally lacking. You can criticize the Canadian Wheat Board for what they did or didn't do, but the government blew away that system and replaced it with nothing. No, there's not enough capacity, and there's no coordination, and farmers are paying through the nose, and it's this government's design of the system that caused that problem.
You got a haiku of a response, Mr. Lemieux?
What I'll say is grain is moving, just nowhere near enough grain. And a 50% bumper crop is definitely not helping. But there is a problem here. The problem must be fixed. All options are on the table. We are working for our farmers, and we'll continue to do so.
Get it done.
To act. Time to act. Get them off the table and get action.
Get it done.
All right, well, we'll wait. Mr. Lemieux, can you tell us when you were going to find out what these options are at least? The viewers are, you say all options. When?
Yeah, I know.
Next week?
You'd probably like me to announce something right here on your show,
Hey.
Evan. It would be great, but no.
It's not me. I'm sure there's farmers wouldn't mind something as well.
Farmers,
Sure,
Evan.
sure.
Farmers are actually looking for an announcement, and if it's unfortunate the parliamentary secretary.
Okay, but
ministers
okay,
have
but
one.
Mr.
What I
Lemieux,
can tell you, we are
how soon?
engaged. We are engaged on this issue, Evan, and we will be announcing a solution. All options are on the
Well, let me
table.
tell you,
if
Evan,
it
it's one of
doesn't
the-
come this week, Parliament adjourns for 2 weeks. There'll be no ability to have legislative action.
It's one of the
Let's
longest
get it done
engagements on the way to the
before
altar I've ever
Friday.
seen in my life.
Listen,
Evan.
we're going to pick this up tomorrow. This is an interesting issue, an important issue for many, many people. Pierre Lemieux, Malcolm Allen, Ralph Goodell.
Thanks.
I appreciate the three of you always coming on the program. Thanks.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks.
Evan.